Dear students, today we will discuss the demand, supply, and market equilibrium. You know that we discussed in our previous lectures the concept of demand. So today we will review the concept of that demand and supply, and as well as the market equilibrium. At the end, we will discuss how this market equilibrium is affected by the changes in demand and changes in the supply conditions. So let us first of all see which topics we are going to discuss in this lecture. This lecture will start with the review of the concept of demand, and after discussing the concept of demand, as we have already discussed it, we will review the concept, and after that we will discuss the concept of supply, which will be followed by the law of supply, then the equilibrium of demand and supply, and at the end we will discuss the conditions in which the equilibrium changes. So first of all, let us come to the review of the concept of demand. Dear students, you know that demand is used in a variety of senses. The common layman also different people use demand in different senses. But this is creating a situation of misunderstanding and the errors in the analysis of the demand. Demand becomes effective only if it is backed by purchasing power, and in addition to there must be willingness to buy a product. So in common sense, demand is used as a desire. If we ask a person what is demand, we are told that demand is actually what a desire. So we are not denying the fact that demand is a desire, but it is not a common desire, but it is the desire which is backed by willingness to pay and the ability to pay. If a person has the ability to pay, but he is not willing to pay, then his desire will not be a demand. Similarly, if a person is willing to pay, but he doesn't have the ability to pay, this will only be his desire. So we can say that demand is a desire backed by ability and willingness to pay for that product. Similarly, in the concept of demand, the concept of the price and the time are also important, because demand is always made at a particular price. Similarly, demand is made per unit time. Sometimes it is made per day, per week, per hour. Similarly, the demand changes with the price. If the price rises, we have discussed that if the price rises, the demand falls. So this means that price is also an important factor in defining the demand. So, dear students, by incorporating the willingness to pay and the ability to pay and the time concept, we can define demand as: demand is the quantity for good or service that consumers are willing and able to purchase during a specified period under a given set of economic conditions. The time frame might be an hour, a day, or a month, or a year, as we discussed earlier. So the demand is we can show it the demand with the help of the demand curve. Demand curve is the graphic representation of the demand schedule. You know that this shows the inverse relationship between the price and the quantity demand. We see there that if the price is 25, so only 3 less than 3 is demanded. If the price falls to 15, we see that 6 units are demanded. So this demand curve shows the negative inverse relationship between price and the quantity demanded. I'm again reviewing the concept of law of demand. We discussed in the previous lectures that The law of demand explains the behavior of consumers, either a single or consumer or household or all consumers collectively. Law of demand shows the relationship between price and the quantity demanded. It is just the concept. It shows the relationship between price and the quantity demanded. If other things do not change, there is inverse relationship between price and the quantity demanded. If the price rises, the demand will fall, and if the price falls, demand will rise. So, in other words, if other things do not change, people buy more of a good when price falls and less of it when the price rises. A decrease in the price of a good, all other things remaining held constant, will cause increase in the quantity demanded of that good. An increase in the price of a good, other things held constant, will decrease the quantity of the good. So it is clear that if the other things are held constant, means if certain assumptions are fulfilled, what happens that if the price rises, it will be followed by fall in demand. And if the price falls, the people purchase more and more at the lower price. So this relationship is called the law of demand. In short, we can say that according to the law of demand, other things remaining same, if the people buy more of a good when its price falls and less of it when its price rises. We can explain the law of demand with the help of the demand curve. We see that suppose this 25 is the price, we see that less than 3 units are consumed or demanded. When the price falls to 20, we see that more than 4 units are demanded. Similarly, if the price is 5, we see that at price 10 units are demanded. This means that there is inverse relationship between price and quantity demanded, and we see the downward sloping demand curve, which shows the inverse relationship between price and the quantity demanded. So we can say that the law of demand shows actually the inverse relationship between price and the quantity demanded. So the concept of supply. Concept of supply is not new for the students of economics. The term supply is also used in the daily life as well by the others people. The common people also use the word supply while trading goods and services. We can define that supply is the quantity of a commodity which is offered for sale in the market. Like the demand, supply is also made at a particular price and per unit time. This means that like the demand, supply is also related to the price of a particular commodity, because the people will be willing to supply more and more at a higher price while they supply less and less at the lower price. We are going to discuss this in the next topic. So we can say simply, we can define supply is the quantity of a commodity which is offered for sale at particular price per unit time at the market. We can say that supply is the quantity of a commodity which is offered for sale in the market at particular price per unit time. So it's complete definition of the term supply. That supply is the quantity of a commodity which is offered for sale in the market at a particular price per unit time. And we can give a simple example. The supply of a milk is 2000 liters at the rate of 120 per liter per week. We can say that in this we have, this is the quantity supplied, this is particular price, and this is the unit of time. A week is the supply can be on weekly basis, it can be on the monthly basis, it can be quarterly or annually. So the time frame is a must to mention in the concept of supply. So dear students, let us simply define again the supply. That what is supply? We will say supply is the quantity of a commodity which is offered for sale in the market at a particular price per unit time. According to Menkeef, the quantity supplied of a good or service is the amount that sellers are willing and able to sell. Just like the just like the concept of demand, in case of supply also we have the willing and ability to supply. So the supply quantity supplied can be defined as the amount of that commodity which the sellers are able and willing to sell. There are many determinants of the quantity supplied, but once again, price plays a special role in our analysis. We can say that supply has many determinants, but the most important determinant is the price. So we can see that when the price of ice cream is high, selling the ice cream is profitable, and so the quantity supplied is large. Means that if the price of a commodity is rising, the sellers will have more and more profit, so they will be willing to supply more and more. That is the reason that at a high price the supply increases, and we have discussed here the example of ice cream, that in the summer we see that the price of ice cream is high, so the people who sell the ice cream, who produce the ice cream, they find it profitable to supply more and more. So the supply is large at a higher price. Sellers of ice cream work long hours, buy many ice cream machines, and hire many workers. By contrast, when the price of ice cream is low, the business is less profitable, so the sellers produce less ice cream. At low, some sellers are even choose to shut down and their quantity supplied falls to zero. There are two general concepts, the stock and supply. There is a difference between the stock and the supply. We can very easily explain the difference between the stock and the supply. Stock is actually the quantity of a commodity which the supplier has but has not offered for sale. It is a quantity of a commodity which is in the market but not offered for sale. It is stored with the producer and will be offered for sale. Means that stock is that quantity of a commodity which is lying with the producer, but he has not offered it for sale in the market. He has kept it in the warehouse, he has kept it in the store, and the supply will be made from that stock. On the other hand, supply is the quantity of a commodity which is actually offered for sale at particular price per unit time. Means that supply is made out of the stock. Supply is the quantity of a commodity which is actually offered for sale in the market, while stock is the quantity of a commodity which is lying with the producer, but he has not offered for sale in the market. In other words, we can say that he is not willing at the moment at this particular price to sell his product, so he will not supply it. So this is the stock, because the stock is lying with the producer. Just like the demand schedule, we have supply schedule, and the concept is very easy to understand. Supply schedule is actually a table that shows the relationship between price of a good and the quantity supplied. In simple words, we can say that supply schedule is nothing but just it is a table which shows the prices and the quantity supplied at those different prices. List of the prices and the quantity supplied. It is a table that shows the relationship between the price of a good and the quantity supplied, holding constant everything else that influences how much producers of good want to sell. It is just a table showing the different quantities supplied at different prices. This is an example of the supply schedule. We can say that the column number 1 shows the price of ice cream cone, and the second column shows the quantity of the cones supplied. We see here in this schedule that when the price is $0, nothing is supplied. If the price is 0.5 per ice cream, 0 is supplied. If the price rises to $1 per ice cream, we see that the supply is 1. When the price increases to 1.5, we see a further increase in the supply. When the price is 2, the supply is 3. When the price is 2.5, the supply further increases to 4. And when the price increases to 3, we see the supply of the cones is 5. By comparing these two columns, we can see very clearly that as the prices rises, we see increase in the supply. But what this whole table shows, it shows the supply schedule, which is nothing but just a list of the prices and the different quantities purchased at these particular prices. We can have the concept of supply curve is just like the demand curve. We have the supply curve, and supply curve is nothing but just the graphic representation of the supply schedule is called supply curve. If you go back, recall your memory in the concept of demand, we had discussed the demand curve, and we said that demand curve is a list of graphic representation of the demand schedule. Similarly, supply curve is the graphic representation of the supply schedule. It shows the relationship between the supply and the price. It is a graph of the relationship between the price of a good and the quantity supplied. These are the different definitions that supply curve is what we showed in the supply schedule, and it is the graphic representation. This we go back to this when we have 0. Supply is 0. When that is raises to 3, we have supply 5. So if you look at this schedule, we see that when the price is 0, supply is 0. When the price is 0.5, the supply is even then 0. When the price is 1, the supply is 1. When the price is 1.5, the supply we see increase in the supply as well. When the price increases to 2, we see a further increase in it. And when the price increases from 2 to 2.5, here we see increase in the supply from 3 to 4. So this curve is called supply curve, and it shows the different points which when we draw the supply schedule on a curve graph. We see get these different points, and by joining these points we can get the supply curve. Again, dear student, be attentive that supply schedule is supply curve is actually the graphic representation of the supply schedule. We see here that recall the table when we have 0, the price is 5, the quantity supplied is 0. When the price rises to 1, the supply increases to 1. When the price increases from 1 to 1.5, there is further increase in the supply from 1 to 2. We again see that when the price increases from 1.5 to $2, we see a further increase in the supply, and so on. Now we come to, dear student, the concept of the market supply schedule and market supply curve. The market supply schedule is actually the summation of the horizontal summation of the individual supply schedule, and the market supply curve is the summation, horizontal summation of the supply curves. Here there in the market we have suppose two buyers, two sellers, Ben and Jerry. We again take the previous example. When the supply is 0, Ben would not like to supply any ice cream. Similarly, Jerry will not also be supply is 0. So the total supply, the market supply by adding the Ben and Jerry supply is 0 cones. Similarly is the case of the when the price increases to 5. When the price increases from 0.5 to $1, we see that Ben would like to supply 1, while the Jerry will not be willing to supply anyone. So by adding the 0 and 1, the total supply becomes, the market supply becomes 1. At the price 1.5, which is higher price than $1, we see that the supply from the Ben side increases to 2, while the Jerry side also increases to 2. If we add the Ben and the Jerry supply, we get the market supply. So the market supply schedule is actually the summation of the individuals' supply schedules. If we add the individual supply horizontally, we get the market supply. This is the example of the market supply curve, which is actually we see in this first graph. It is the Benz supply, the prices and the quantity supplied. This is the Jerry's supply. On the y-axis we measure the price of ice cream, while on the x-axis we measure the quantity of ice cream cones, and you see the Jerry's supply curve upward sloping. By adding this 1 and 2, we get the market supply curve. As we see the S market we see here. This is actually the summation of the Benz and Jerry's supply curves. We have seen in this our discussion that price is one of the most important determinant of the supply. So that is the reason that we discuss the law of supply. The law of supply shows actually the relationship between the price and the quantity supplied. Dear students, as we discussed earlier, that if the price rises, the producers, the sellers, they find it profitable to sell more and more, so they increase the supply. On the other hand, when the price falls, the profit of the producers will fall. So with the fall in the price, they will supply less and less. In other words, we can say that if the other things remain same, if the price rises, the suppliers will increase supply. If the price falls, then the suppliers will reduce supply. Because if the price rises, it is profitable for the producer to sell more and more. So what they do, that they increase supply. If the price falls, the producers will find it less profitable to sell more and more. So what they do, that they reduce supply. And this is actually the statement of the law of supply, which states that other things being equal, when the price of a good rises, the quantity supplied of a good also rises. When the price falls, the quantity supplied falls as well. We can say that other things remaining same. If the price of commodity rises, the supply will rise. If the price falls, supply will fall. This is the statement of law of supply. Another definition is it means that other things remaining same. If the price of a commodity rises, its supply will rise. If the price falls, supply will fall. Means that there is a positive relationship, direct relationship between the price and the quantity supplied. We can explain the law of supply with the help of the supply schedule and the supply curve. We see here that according to the statement, when the price rises, the supply also rise. So we see here that when the price rises from 0.5 to $1 per ice cream, the supply increases from 0 to 1. When the price further increases from 1 to $1.5, we see a further increase in the supply, and so on. As we go downward in this table, we see a rise in the price. On the second column, we see that it increase in the price, we see increase in the supply. Similarly, we can also explain it with the help of the supply schedule. We take this point. When the price is 1.5, the supply is 2. When the price increases to $2, we see increase in supply to 3. If the price further increases from 2 to $2.5, we see that the new point is this one. This means there is with increase in the price of the ice cream from 2 to 2.5, we see increase in the supply from 4 to 5. Dear students, we see here that the supply curve is upward sloping from left to right, which shows positive relationship between the price and the quantity supplied. If you recall the definition of the assumption of definition of the law of supply, we say that other things remaining same, if the price rises, supply also rises. If the price falls, supply will also fall. What does this other things mean? These other things means certain assumptions. If certain assumptions are fulfilled, then the law will hold valid, otherwise it will not hold valid. So what are those assumptions? Those assumptions are cost of production do not change, because if the cost of production changes, means if the price of the raw material increases, Definitely it will lead to increase in the price, but this will at this stage they will not increase, the producer will not increase the supply, because this increase in the price is due to increase in the cost of production, not because of the profit. So their profit not increases. That is the reason that if the cost of production changes, then this is the violation of the law. So one of the assumptions of the law of supply is that the cost of production do not change. Similarly, dear students, we have another assumption: the production technology do not change, because if the production technology changes, if a new automatic machinery is introduced, it is possible that it may produce more and more goods, so the supply increases, although the price is not increased. This is also a violation of law of supply. Floods and wars. During the floods and wars, also the law of supply doesn't hold valid, because if in the floods or in the wars there can be shortage of the supply. If even the price rises, the supply may not rise due to the floods or due to the wars and due to lack of the means of the supply. Number of sellers. Similarly, if the number of sellers increases, what will happen? That the supply will increase. So this is another, although the price is constant, so this is also a violation of that law. Land order conditions. Sometimes there may be supply shortage due to the land order worst land order situation, due to the some protest, due to some other these type of the activities. It is possible that the supply may be disturbed. Expectation about future prices change in the prices may also affect the law of the supply. So the law of supply doesn't hold valid in cases there people expect a further increase in the prices. While discussing the concept of the supply, it is necessary to discuss the concept of the extension and contraction in supply. Sometimes the students are puzzled, they confused with the concept of the shift in supply or extension and contraction in supply. Both of these shows a change in the supply, but the extension and contraction in supply is actually due to the change in the price. The effect of change in price on the quantity supplied is called extension and contraction in demand. It is possible that if the price rises, you may see an increase in the supply. This is called extension in supply. And sometimes if you take it reverse, if the price falls from 8 to 6, we see a fall in the supply from 150 to 100. This is called contraction. Expansion and contraction means if there is a increase in the supply due to increase in the price, it is called extension. If there is a fall in the supply due to fall in the price, it is contraction. So we can say that the extension and contraction of supply occurs due to change in the price of the commodity only. Look at this picture. The picture, it shows that when the price is 6, the supply is 100. When the price increases to 8, the supply increases to 150. This is called extension. Extension means increase in supply due to change in price. Take it reverse. If the price falls from 8 to 6, we see the supply falls from 150 to 100. It is called contraction, because the supply contracted, reduced due to the reduction in price due to decrease in price. We have another concept, rise and fall of supply, or we can also call it rise and fall. We can say rise and fall in supply, or we can call it the shift in supply curve. Therefore, we see that if the supply changes due to other factors than price, then it causes shift in supply curve. If you go back to the extension and contraction, in this case we see the movement along same demand curve. If there is extension or there is contraction, we move on the same demand curve from one point to another point. But in case of if the price change, if the supply changes due to some other factors like weather change, because if the weather changes from summer to winter or from winter to summer, it is expected that there will be short in demand, and the due to lesser demand, the producer may not supply more. So that is actually the contraction. If the supply decreases due to weather change or due to other factors, then not because of the price may remain constant, but the demand, the supply changes, then it is called the rise and fall in supply. If the supply decreases due to weather change, we say it is fall in supply. If the supply increases due to change in the weather, it is called a rise in supply. In both cases, rise or fall, the supply curve will shift. Let us come to this table. This table is very simple to understand. When the price is 16, the supply is 600. But if at the same price the weather changes and the supply increases to 1000, we see that the price is constant but the supply is increased. This is called rise in supply. At 24 price, initial supply is 800, but due to some change in some other factor like the weather change, the supply is 1200. Similarly, at 32, the price remains constant, but the supply increases. We can also refer it to demand in winter, demand in summer. So, if the price is 16, the demand is it is a summer product. The demand is less in the winter, and it is higher in the summer. So, similarly, we can say that if the price is 24. In winter, the 800 of this commodity is demanded, as it is summer product. When the weather changes, at the same price 1200 is supplied, because it is a summer product. When the price is 32, we see that in the winter the supply is 1000, because it is a summer product, so no much market. When the price, when the weather changes to summer, we see an increase in the supply. So this is the increase, rise and fall in the supply. We can explain it with the help of the graph. That if the price is 16, we see that in the winter the demand is 600, and the summer the demand is 1000. Similarly, at 32 price, that in summer the demand is we see that this is the example of the winter, that when the price is 16, it is 600, but in the winter its demand is 1000. So the point shifts here. Similarly, when the price is 32, in this we have demand is 1000 in the winter, but in the summer the demand is 1200, around about 1200. So we get other points, and if by joining these points we get the supply curve, and we see that this is supply, the new points are away from the supply curve, and by joining those points we get another supply curve. This means that due to a rise in the supply curve shifts rightward. Similar is the case that if the quantity supplied reduces due to the change in the weather, the supply curve may shift leftward. After discussing the concept of the demand and the supply, the demand and supply curves, let us discuss the concept of the market equilibrium. It is a very simple concept. In the according to the dictionary meanings, equilibrium is a position where forces are in balance. If the rightward force is balances the leftward force, the upward force balances the downward force. If you remember that those who are familiar with the physics may have read about the equilibrium there, where the two forces balance each other. And similarly, as we have when we talk about the market in economics, we say that there are two forces which we called the market forces, known as the force of demand and the supply. So the forces, the point where these two forces balance each other is called market equilibrium. In other words, market equilibrium is a point where the demand for a product is equal to the supply of the product. Or in other words, we can say that by equilibrium we mean such a situation where the demand for a commodity is equal to the supply of that particular commodity, and the price at that point is called the equilibrium price, while the quantity at that point is called equilibrium quantity. So at the equilibrium point, the quantity of a good that buyers are willing and able to buy exactly balances the quantity that sellers are willing and able to sell. Means that at equilibrium point, the quantity demanded is equal to the quantity supplied. Equilibrium refers to the market condition which once achieved tends to persist. In economics, it occurs when the quantity of a commodity demanded in a market per unit time equals the quantity of commodity supplied to the market over the same time period. In simple words, we can again explain the concept of market equilibrium in economics, that by market equilibrium we mean a point where the quantity demanded is equal to the quantity supplied. There is neither surplus supply, neither surplus demand. Means what is demanded is supplied and there is nothing unsold. Geometrically, now how can we get this point? Geometrical equilibrium occurs at the intersection of the commodities market demand curve and market supply curve. The equilibrium point is attained by the intersection of the demand and the supply curve. The price and quantity at the equilibrium exist are known as the equilibrium price and the equilibrium quantity. The equilibrium price is sometimes called market clearing price because at this price everyone in the market has been satisfied. Buyers have bought what they want to buy and sellers have sold what they want to sell. In other words, we can say that the equilibrium point is actually the point of intersection of the demand curve and the supply curve. It's a table. This table clarifies the concept of equilibrium very well. Suppose the price is 4, we have quantity demanded 26 and the quantity supplied 0. This means that demand is greater than supply, or we can say that there is shortage of that commodity, so the price will rise. When the price increases to 8, the quantity demanded is 24, because you know that with increase in the price the demand falls but the supply increases. So we see that the supply has increased to 4. So here too the demand is greater than supply, still we have the shortage of that commodity. When the price increases to 12, the quantity demanded falls to 22, the quantity supplied increases to 12, but still the demand and supply are not equal. Here the demand is again greater than supply. This is called shortage, and if there is shortage of a product in the market, the price will rise. Similarly, dear students, when the price further increases to 16, we see the supply quantity demanded falls to 20, the quantity supplied increases to 20. In this situation, we have the quantity demanded equal to the quantity supplied. So what will happen? This position is called equilibrium. There will be market equilibrium at the price when the price reaches the 16, because the quantity demanded is equal to the quantity supplied and both are equal to 20. This is called equilibrium position. At this equilibrium point, this price 16 is called equilibrium price, and this quantity as demand and supply are equal, this is called equilibrium quantity. Now if the price further increases to 20, we see that according to law of demand, the quantity demanded falls, the supply increases. Here we have demand less than supply, or supply is greater than demand, so the price level will fall. And if we further see an increase in the supply, the demand will further increase in the price will further, the demand will further fall, the supply will further increase. In this case again we see that demand is less than supply or supply is greater than demand, this position there we have surplus of that commodity and the price will fall. We can explain it with the help of this diagram. On the basis of this data, we can draw the demand and supply curves, and we see that both these curves intersect each other at point E. This is the supply curve, this is the demand curve. Both these curves intersect each other at point E. So this E is known as the equilibrium point, and the price at this, in our case is 16, is the equilibrium price when the quantity supplied and the quantity demanded are equal, and this quantity is called equilibrium quantity. Any point away of this will show disequilibrium in the market, and there will be any point of this E point will show surplus or shortage. Suppose we take the price 20. At the price 20, we see that the demand is this one, while the supply is more. So the demand is less than supply. So here we have the surplus. While at lower price, we see that the demand is this much, the supply is this much. This is the supply 12 units, the demand is 24 units. So here is the shortage. We can say that above the equilibrium point we have surplus, and below this we have the shortage. Now in this we see in this that the equilibrium is brought about by the forces of demand and supply. Geometrically, when the demand curve and the point at which the demand curve and the supply curve intersect each other is the equilibrium point. So this means that if the demand curve shifts upward or downward, it will affect the equilibrium point. If the supply curve shift downward or leftward, there will also be a change in the equilibrium point, and will not only affect the quantity supplied in the market, but it will or demanded in the market, but it will also affect the price. The price may rise or fall if we move away from this equilibrium point. And how will we move from this point? We can move from this point upward or downward or thisward due to change in the demand and supply. So as discussed, the equilibrium is attained at the point where demand and supply curve intersect each other. If there is a change in demand or supply, it will shift the equilibrium point. When the supply increases or decreases while demand remains constant, and the supply curve shifts while the demand remains constant. So let us discuss in detail. This is the first case. The basic equilibrium is at point E. Dear short, we see DD is the demand curve, SS is the supply curve. Both the curves intersect each other at point E. So E is the equilibrium point where this one OP is this is the case when there is change in supply while demand remains constant. In this case, we see that the supply changes but demand remains the same. This is the original position. SS supply curve, DT demand curve intersect each other at point E. So E is the equilibrium point, P is the price, Q is the quantity. Now suppose that due to certain factors the supply increases, so the supply curve shifts downward S1. The new equilibrium point is E1. So what we see that the new price is P1. The new quantity is Q1. This means that if the supply curve increases, and the demand remains constant, what will happen that the quantity supplied will increase in the market and the price will fall. On the other hand, if the supply reduces, supply falls, the supply curve will shift from S to S2. We see that the new intersection point shifts from E to E3, E2, this point. And we see that at this new point the price is P2, while at E it was P. This means that if supply falls, what happens that the price will increase and the quantity will also fall. This is the second case where we see that the supply remains constant while the demand curve shifts. Again, be attentive. Again, come to the original equilibrium point where dd is original demand curve, S is the supply curve. Both intersect each other at point E, so E is the equilibrium point, and at this E point we see this dark line to P. Equilibrium price is OP. Equilibrium price is OP. Equilibrium supply is OQ. But if due to certain reason the supply remains constant but the demand curve shifts, demand increases, so the demand curve shifts upward, and the new equilibrium point becomes E1, which is due to the intersection of the D1 and S1. So at this new equilibrium, we see that the price has increased to P1 while the quantity demanded increased to equilibrium quantity increases to Q1. Now, again, this was a case of a shift in the demand curve upward, or due to increase in the rise in the demand curve shift rightward. There can be another case from this original position. If the demand falls due to some other factor, due to the weather change, or due to the change in the consumer income, or due to some other reasons, the demand falls, so the demand curve shifts from D to D2. The equilibrium point shifts to E to E2, and the price falls from P to P2, and the equilibrium quantity from Q to Q2. This means that due to fall in demand, due to reduction in demand, due to decrease in demand, if the demand curve shifts downward, the equilibrium price will fall. While in case of the shifting, the increase in the demand or shifting the demand curve rightward, the equilibrium position can change, and there will be increase in the price of the commodity. Now, it is possible that the demand and supply curve both may shift. Like this case, we see that S1 and D1 are original demand and supply curve. P is the equilibrium position, Q is the quantity, Q1 is the equilibrium quantity. But if the demand curve shifts from D1 to D2 and the supply curve shifts from S1 to S2, but we see that the change is equal. They change equally. Equally. Yes. They change equally. We see that the original demand and supply curve gives us equilibrium point here, E1, while the price is P and the quantity is Q1. But if the supply curve shifts and the demand curve also shifts and the shift is equal, then what happens that the price may remain constant and the equilibrium quantity may increase. In simple words, dear students, we can say if the demand and supply changes equally, the price will remain constant while the equilibrium quantity will increase. This is another case when demand increases more than supply. This is the case original supply curve S1, original demand curve D1. This is equilibrium. P1 is the price, Q1 is the quantity. But if the demand curve the demand curve shifts to D2 and the supply shifts from S1 to S2, but we see that the gap in the two demand curves is too much, while the gap in the supply curve is less. In other words, we see that demand increases more than increase in the supply. In this case, the equilibrium price will increase and the quantity will also increase. But if they change equally, then in that case the price may remain constant. Dear student, this lecture is based on two books, Salvatore 2006 and the Mankiw 2009. So for the reference, you can read these books. Thank you very much.